This is Justice, History, and the Law. Lectures, discussions, and interviews from the Robert H. Jackson Center in Jamestown, New York.
On today's show, we have the opening remarks from the International Humanitarian Law Dialogs held in August of 2010. Mr. Ben Ferencz is the keynote speaker. He is introduced by Professor Michael Scharf.
We have a really highlight our keynote address, and to introduce the individual who will be presenting that keynote address is our good friend from Case Western University School of Law, Michael Scharf. Michael?
Thank you, Greg. Over the years, I've been privileged to give several speeches at this conference, and I think that there is none that I am so happy to give as this short introduction of a person who needs no introduction. But nonetheless, let me tell you a little bit about Ben Ferencz. For the past 20 years, he and I have been close friends, and he's been like a second father to me, and his son Don has been like another brother. He was born in the Carpathian Mountains of Transylvania some 90 years ago, in the same area that my family hails from. He grew up in a terrible place known as Hell's Kitchen in the Manhattan area, a very rough neighborhood that may have been some of the transformative days of his life that helped him grow into the fighter with the spirit that he has. He graduated from Harvard Law School in 1943 and promptly enlisted in the U.S. Army Infantry during the most bloody days of World War II. He fought all over Europe under General Patton and then was transferred to the U.S. Army War Crimes Branch because of his legal background and everybody's knowledge of what a great legal mind he had. He was present at the liberation of Buchenwald, of Mauthausen, of Dachau concentration camps, saw some of the most terrible things any human being has ever witnessed. In 1945, at the young age of 27, he joined Telford Taylor's prosecution team as a lawyer for the Control Council Law No. 10 trials. He became the chief prosecutor of the worst of all trials ever tried in a courtroom, the Eisengruppen case. The AP called it the biggest murder trial in history. 1 million victims. Never before and never since has there ever been a case of that magnitude. All 22 defendants were convicted at the end of that trial. He was also, during that trial, the first person ever to utter the word genocide in a courtroom, turning that word into a legal term that he has fought for to prevent for the rest of his life. He then worked on Jewish reparations from Germany and then left a lucrative law practice to teach at Pace Law School and to write several influential books, including his 1975 tome called, quote, Defining Aggression. That led him on two quests that he has spent for the rest of his years. One, to keep the law of aggression alive during a period of time of the Cold War where the major powers did not want a crime of aggression, where Robert Jackson's dream of outlawing war was quickly becoming the reality of the major powers creating little crimes of aggression on their own and running from that label. Also, he has worked for his life to establish an international criminal court. At the time, he was one of the lone voices, and it seemed like a pipe dream. In 1994, he was nice enough to reach out and find a young first-year law professor named Michael Scharf and write the foreword for my first book, helping me get a publisher and launching me on my academic career. 13 books later, I thank you for that, beyond my ability to thank. We've been close friends ever since, and we've worked together on several projects. He has enlisted me in his two great passions. In 1998, Ben, Whitney Harris, and my colleague, the late Henry King, traveled to Rome, and there they did the unthinkable. They forced the delegates to put the crime of aggression in the statute of the International Criminal Court at a time when no country wanted to do it. And at the time, it seemed like mere symbolism. No one thought it was ever going to amount to anything. But Ben, I think, knew better. In 2008, he convinced me to convene an experts meeting at Case Western Reserve University, where several of the people who were chairing the attempt to try to put the crime of aggression in the International Criminal Court statute from the Assembly of State Parties, including the president of the working group, Christian Vanavasser, participated, and several of the experts in this room were there. That experts meeting started to create some of the ideas that bore fruit a couple of years later. This summer, Ben and I and several people in this room spent 2 weeks in Kampala on the shores of Lake Victoria. If you didn't see it, his speech before the Assembly of State Parties is something that maybe is even more stirring than your remarks in your trial that we've seen, several of us have seen before. He was the moral force which really changed the dynamics of what was going on in Kampala. And somehow the unthinkable happened. If people were to bet before those 2 weeks whether the International Criminal Court statute would be amended to include the crime of aggression, almost everybody would bet against. After that speech, people said, I think it might happen. And at the end of 2 weeks, it did. Last year, Ben was also awarded the distinguished and prestigious Erasmus Prize from the Dutch royal family. It was also given at the same time to Antonio Cassese, who had been the president of the Yugoslavia Tribunal and is now president of the Special Tribunal for Lebanon. I think the two of them are equals on this international stage. Maybe Ben is the first among those equals. Then a few months ago, Ben received the highest civilian honor that the German government bestows. It's called the Commander's Cross of the Order of Merit of Germany. Ben told me when we were drinking and having some pizza in the Lake Victoria shores, quote, "That's not bad for a Jewish kid from Hell's Kitchen who helped hang a few of their countrymen in 1946. You know, Ben is wise, but he's impish. He's 9 decades old, but he's so full of energy and wit. And he has a gentle soul, but he has been perhaps the most tenacious force for the cause of international justice in any of our lifetimes. And it is my great pleasure to introduce Ben Ferencz.
Thank you very much, Michael. That fantastic introduction. Don't believe everything you hear. However, what I'm going to do in order to save my strength for my old age, I'm going to go over to the other side so that you'll see there's a body also attached to this voice. Michael gives me credit for launching him. He's a good illustration of what you can do. He's become a rocket in the stellar performances in the search for international criminal justice. And now I'll have to figure out what it is that I'm expected to talk to you about. There's a very mixed audience here. I'm confronted with prosecutors, which is a terrible thing. I've got to face them all, a whole row of 14 of them here, and say something which they understand and which relates to what they're interested in. And behind them, I have about 50 kids who want to hear about blood and guts and Nuremberg, things of that kind. They don't want to know anything about Article 124, Section 5. So I'm going to move over there and then see what the program requires of me. The program says I'm to talk to you, and the guests, you're the guests, the participants, a meaningful dialogue concerning international criminal law, past, present, and future. So all I have to do is, in the course of about half an hour or so, tell you all about the past, tell you all about the present, and tell you all about the future. The future is easy for me. It's limited. I'm over 90 years of age. I don't want to project too far. But let me go back, not too far in history. It's been mentioned that, I was a poor immigrant boy and managed to get through the Harvard Law School somehow. And one of the things I did in school, and I say this for the benefit of the students, which turned out later to be rather eventful in my life, I got a job working for the leading criminologist in America, Professor Sheldon Gluck at Harvard. And he wanted to write a book on war crimes. And like many professors, he wanted a student. I'd gotten a scholarship on my exam on criminal law who would do the work. So I was required to read every book in the Harvard Law Library in any language I understood and do a little summary for him. And I did. And one of the books I read was by a Romanian diplomat by the name of Vespasian Pella. You can forget the name. And he wrote a book on la criminalité des États, le droit pénal de l'avenir. That means, in English, the criminal law of the future. I'm just showing off with my French, which I have forgotten in the meanwhile. And that book, the point of it was, if you have international crimes, and they were dealing with counterfeiting, you should have an international court to deal with it. And that seemed to me to be a pretty sensible idea. I still have the same idea. You have international crimes, you should have an international court to deal with it. It has been mentioned that I was a soldier in World War II. The Army, knowing of my great scholarly background and intensive knowledge in the field of war crimes, immediately assigned me as a private in the artillery. As a typist, and I also couldn't type. Well, we got over that. By the time we landed on the beaches of Normandy, I was already a corporal. I was making good progress. And we went through all the battles. Don't just need to spell them out. The final Battle of the Bulge, when the 101st Airborne Division was entrapped in Bastogne, and Patton said, every man who can carry a gun goes to the front. And off we went. Anyway, I won't want to recite all the horrors of war, even though that's what the young people here would like me to do. But I'll give you some taste of it, perhaps, because one of my assignments as we reached Germany and France was to go into the concentration camps and collect evidence of the crimes, because the President of the United States and the other leading powers had warned the Germans that they would be held to account. And we had a pretty good idea of what was going on, because refugees coming out had reported. They all went into this Harvard professor. He was a member of a committee dealing with that, and I knew what was going on. And, well, the experience in the concentration camps is not something I want to recite to you before lunch, or at any time for that matter. The horrors are unimaginable to a rational human mind, where you see human beings who are dying, you think they're dead, you step past them and they move, skeletons lined up in front of a crematoria waiting to be burned, inmates running out trying to catch a guard, killing them, beating them to death, burning them alive. All of that, I've seen all of that, smelled all of that. I don't like to talk about it because I usually can't talk much about it. I don't want to talk about it. But for the benefit of those young people who are here, it certainly had a traumatic effect on my thinking, in that I was convinced that the worst thing that we could do was to have a war. And what could I do to prevent another Holocaust? This was a challenge for me as a young man. And I could see that we had a system of settling disputes between states where if the leaders can't agree, what you do is you send your Army, Navy, and Air Force, and Marines, and you kill a lot of young people. And they kill you. And that's how you hope to settle your disputes. Well, that seemed to be a crazy thing to do. They were killing people. I didn't even know who they were. They didn't know who I was. And they had no good reason. And they were fighting in distant lands they never heard of. And they're still doing it today. So with that kind of a reference to the past, along comes Jackson. Justice Jackson. Others will talk more about him. You've heard Professor John Barrett, who was the great biographer of Jackson. He got the point that the supreme international crime is the crime of aggression. And aggression meant an illegal war, a war in violation of treaties and agreements. And it encompassed all the other crimes. There has never been a war without rape of women. That goes with it. There's never been a war without killing thousands of innocent people. That goes with it. There's never been a war without murdering little children. That goes with it. This is all part of war making. If we can stop the war making, we may have some deterrent effect on that type of crime. That was the very simple conclusion which Jackson had. It was shared later by Telford Taylor. It was shared by Whitney Harris, who wrote about it. It's been mentioned. It certainly was shared by me and many others, but they were not the people in power. They were the people who did the suffering. and we're told to be quiet. The diplomats are working on it at the United Nations. I sat through 20 years personally of attending every meeting, I think, of discussions on the crime of aggression. What is aggression? That's not the point. The point is stop the damn thing. You stop killing people. Stop the war making. Don't come with me with big, drawn-out definitions and discussions and this and that and that. But I sat through all that. I wrote big books about them, too. And all of my books and all of my lectures, incidentally, are available free of charge on my website, which is my name, benferenz.org, courtesy of the United Nations. You're at liberty to copy, steal them, do whatever you want. No accreditation, no payment is necessary. All you need is the determination to try to do what you can to stop war making, to make it a more humane world. So there we had Justice Jackson setting a precedent, dealing with the past. That was a keystone activity in the past, the Nuremberg Trials. Hailed throughout the world, approved by the General Assembly of the United Nations, became the foundation stone for what was hoped to be a new legal order consisting of international courts and a code of crimes to define what is permissible and what's not permissible. They're still working on it. It was a long time ago. But they've been making some progress. They've been going forward. So you want to know what is the present. Well, in order to judge the present, you must bear in mind what I learned after many years of study and writing and so on. In order to have an orderly society, there are three things that you need, three fundamental things, whether it be in Chautauqua or in New York or in Germany or France or anywhere. And that is you need laws to define what is permissible and what's not permissible. You need courts to determine whether the laws are violated or as a medium for settling disputes. And you need a system of effective enforcement. Those 3 points, laws, courts, and enforcement, are the foundation stone for every lawful society. To the extent that they are operative and good, you have peace. To the extent that you don't have them, you have turmoil. The world has moved away from the system of nation states. We are now an international planet. Planetary thinking is what is now required to recognize that we are all inhabitants of one small planet in a vast cosmos of billions of planets. And we must organize our affairs in such a way that everyone on that planet can live in a minimum standard of peace and human dignity. And it can be done. I refuse to believe that it cannot be done. When I see the money that's spent on armaments, useless armaments, nuclear weapons, which are already obsolete because they're going to hit you from cyberspace in the next war, which can cripple the electronic net of every city. Now, I'm not revealing military secrets because anybody who's been following it knows that. So the old system of national thinking is obsolete, and we have to have international thinking. But in the international sphere, the laws are just beginning. We're beginning. When I started with this 50 years ago, at least, people said, Ben, it's a fool's errand. It'll never happen. You'll never have an international criminal court. Nations are not going to accept it. They don't want to give up their sovereign rights. They fought for their sovereign rights. Going to war is a glorious thing. It's the road to power, to conquest, to riches. They're not going to give that up. And I said, yes, they will. Because if they don't, they'll be dead. So we began to make progress with regard to the international laws. Growing out of Nuremberg, a big step forward. We made some more progress on that in Rome with the Statute. We had a consensus definition of aggression. Consensus means everybody agreed. I mentioned they worked on it for 30 years. I wrote 2 volumes, the consensus definition of aggression, which then they forgot about. Aggression has not been defined, became the big excuse. And what is still missing, in addition to the laws and the courts, we are now beginning to build the courts. They have prosecutors here. The founder, the first prosecutor, the first international criminal court since Nuremberg, and the other courts that are growing up. This is an emerging process of the creation of the legal institutions necessary in an international society trying to maintain peace. One thing is missing: enforcement. We have no enforcement yet. A court without enforcement is a hope. It's not a legal system. And we haven't gotten there yet. So we have to look at it in somewhat of a historical perspective and see what do we do now. Quite logically, if you need 3 legs on a stool for the stool to be able to stand on it, and you have 2 legs, and they are weak, what do? You don't kick out 1 or 2 of the legs. You strengthen those legs, and you start to build a 3rd leg. And when you have the 3 of them in place, then you can begin to reach the heights which you needed in order to use a stool. We have not yet begun work on the 3rd leg. So that is something for the future. And I'm glad we have young people here, because that future is beyond my vision at the moment. But let me go back now to where do we stand? You've heard about Kampala. In Rome, we took a big step forward. We had 1,000 points of difference for 10, 20 years of negotiating all these fine points of all these treaties, and they finally got down and they settled down. And the most difficult point was the crime of aggression, the biggest crime of all. They couldn't reach agreement on it. And the reason they couldn't reach agreement was because those who had the power to dominate the world, or to use power, military force, to achieve their goals, were not eager to have somebody else looking over their shoulder telling them they shouldn't do it. And that's understandable from a logical point of view. From a human point of view, it's a disaster. It's a disaster. What do you say? Those with the power are free to go around and kill anybody they like and nobody can stop them? What kind of a world is that? So in Rome, they said, we're going to have an international criminal court. Here it is. Here's the statute. Worked it out. Everybody was fine. Whitney Harris was there. I was there. But they stumbled on the crime of aggression, the most dangerous crime of all. By this time, the United Nations had also been formed as part of our original dream. We were going to have courts to enforce the law. The United Nations would build a more humane society and would prescribe in its charter what was permissible and not permissible. Well, what was not permissible was the use of armed force against the sovereignty or territorial integrity of a state. That was prohibited. The use of armed force was prohibited, except in self-defense or when authorized by the Security Council. Security Council were the 5 victorious powers. They had the ability to enforce the law. Nobody else had the ability, so they gave them the power. And frankly, I was a soldier, just came home from the war with 10 million other unemployed people looking for a job. I thought that that's a good idea. I wouldn't want some foreigners telling me I got to go back and start all over again. So it happened that way, that they got an exercise of veto power. Veto power is very important because it keeps coming up again. It'll come up in a moment when I talk to you about what happened in Kampala. So we had this Nuremberg setup, and we had the Rome setup, and they couldn't agree on the crime of aggression, so what did they do? In order to reach a consensus, it's very easy to reach a consensus on some things and impossible to reach a real consensus on other things, things of substance. You want to get a consensus, you say postpone it. That's easy. Or you say drop it. That's also possible. But the best thing is postpone it. Put it in the back burner. We'll deal with that one later. That's what they did with the crime of aggression. Now, meanwhile, we've set up this whole slew of international criminal courts. Crimes in Rwanda, crimes in Yugoslavia. First, they had to rape 10,000 women in Yugoslavia before we got a little impetus. It's time to do something, boys. Raping 10,000 women is not nice, and you can't send in the troops to stop it because they're going to commit more rapes. So we began to set up the system of courts, which is still growing, and with their problems, These are prototypes. They are beginnings of an international rational legal system. And with the prototypes, of course, you have all kinds of problems. It's too expensive, it costs too much money, it takes too long, people are incompetent, political influences, all that kind of arguments. But it's there. It's there, and it never happened before. And so to all first-row gentlemen, don't prosecute me. I'm an innocent guy. I didn't do it. But I thank you for the fact that you are here, that you're functioning. It's the beginning, in most cases, not in all cases. However, so what do we do now? We come to Kampala. The thing has been postponed, and they have big discussions about definition of aggression has to be defined. Let me say at the outset, I am by temperament and policy a realistic optimist. Realist because I see all these problems, and I do see the problems. Many of them are not mentioned by anybody, and I don't mention them because I'm an optimist. Optimist because I see solutions and I see the progress. And the progress has been fantastic. But before we go into the progress, which I hope to end, what are the difficulties which we have? We came out of Kampala with a consensus. And I've given you my opinion of consensus. Consensus means everybody has a veto of everything. Try to work out a system of that. Everybody can veto everything. I am quite sure that if you put on the agenda how to peel a potato, you couldn't get 100 nations to agree. They would say postpone it. Or it depends on what you mean by a potato. You can always put in language which they can interpret any way they see fit. That's good. That's a good way to reach consensus. That's how you do it. And I learned the tricks. I've been hanging around. So we come to Kampala. What's the situation? United States, as you know, and I'll leave that to Ambassador Rapp, who's a very competent man, who will come out of your ranks too, will explain the U.S. position. I won't go into it in detail, but basically, what's the scene? The scene is this great country to which I am eternally indebted. It's been mentioned that I came from a poor immigrant family. It had wonderful opportunities for me, and I'm grateful to the United States for that. United States is a powerful country. It's a great democracy. And it's normal that in any democracy you have people with different opinions. That's the way it should be. That's what democracy means. And so you have some people in the United States who say, we are powerful. We are the sole remaining superpower, like Ozymandias, king of kings. Look on my works, ye mighty in despair, and around that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the level lands stretch far away. The great monarchies, the great dynasties, the great empires of yesterday, the Roman Empire, the British Empire, the Belgian, the Spanish Empire, all of the colonial powers. Where are they now? They're sending representatives to a court to deal with crimes which are being committed against innocent people. So when it came to the question of aggression, first of all, they put a lot of things in the statute which said, if you don't want to be bound, you're not bound. Hey, hurrah, what an agreement is that? If you don't want to be bound, say, I don't want to be bound. Okay, you're out. How about you? You're in, but then you got to tell us you don't want to be bound. Okay, we'll tell you don't have to be bound. Okay, you're out. So they play that game, which if you look at it stripped down to its bare essentials, it's ridiculous. What are you doing? What are you doing? You're reaching an agreement on points on which there is no agreement. Some people ready to accept it. Chad, Malawi, Seychelles Islands, they're ready to go. We'll give up the right to commit aggression. But the big powers, Russia, China, the United States, United Kingdom, sort of wavering, France, they say, let's wait. We got the power, we got nuclear weapons. Let's see, let's not rush into giving away that power because our military will be hesitant to go. Some of you remember the Downing Street papers where they were discussing the illegal war against Iraq, which had not been approved by the United Nations General Assembly. And the general in charge of the British forces said, I'm not going unless I get a legal opinion that says it's lawful. Nuremberg precedent, your precedents, were held up. They had a deterrent effect. Didn't work because they gave him the legal opinion he wanted. First, our colleague Elizabeth Wilmshurst, who was their expert, the UK, United Kingdom expert on aggression, for many years. We had many debates. She said, I have to resign. I can't serve a country that's committing the crime of aggression. And she resigned. Hooray for her. Hooray for Elizabeth. I said, Lizzie, you finally got the point. And so we had a situation where the United States, the big power, was doing things which, in the minds of some people, was a crime of aggression. In the minds of others, it was a projection of our power and our interest, and we only do it for noble and humanitarian reasons. Everybody knows that. Well, not everybody knows that. We haven't defined humanitarian intervention. And if everybody says, well, I only did it for humanitarian reasons, where are we? Now here, for some of the kids in the background, I have a little problem. It's been mentioned, I was the chief prosecutor for the United States in a case against Einsatzgruppen. Forget the word. Nobody knows how to translate it. These were special extermination squads whose job it was to go in and murder, without pity or remorse, every single Jewish male, man, woman, and child, and do the same with the gypsies, and wipe them all out, liquidate them, root and branch. That was their job, and in they went, and they did, as best they could. And we found their records. They didn't expect that. Top secret records, and they listed all of the crimes in all of the towns. They never called them crimes. They never even called them killings. They said that they were settled, they were resettled, they were taken care of, they were eliminated, And we had all of those crimes, and I tabbled them up on a little hand-adding machine. And when I found over 1 million people dead, I said, it's enough, we go to trial. I don't need any witnesses. I don't need anything. I got the proof. He's right here, top secret documents with the names of the people. How many of them do we have in the clink? Because if you haven't got the defendants, you also can't go to trial. If you've got the defendants and no evidence, you can't go to trial. But we had enough of both of them to make a sampling of 3,000 men who every day went out and murdered men, women, and little children. And there was some debate about murdering the children. Some of the young people want me to talk about blood and guts. Some of the extermination squad members would use the children as targets, throw them up into the air and shoot them. But my lead defendant, who was an honest man, Dr. Ollendorf, most of my defendants had doctorate degrees, generals and so on. He said, no, the mother should hold the infant to her child, aim for the mother, then you kill both of them in one shot. The woman stops screaming, and you save ammunition. This was the mentality. And what were they thinking? I asked Olin, how do you justify this? Your reports show you killed thousands and thousands of children. He said, well, it's self-defense. What do you mean self-defense? Nobody attacked you. You attacked France, Belgium, Holland, Norway, Denmark, Sweden, Poland. Where do you come off with self-defense? Yes, but we anticipated that Russia was going to attack us, Soviet Union was going to attack us. So, self-defense, we preempted, and we went in first. And why did you kill all the Jews? Well, everybody knows the Jews are in favor of the communists. We got to kill them too. And why did you kill all the gypsies? Well, the gypsies, nobody can trust the gypsies. So you got to get them out of the way, so you get them out of the way. And why did you kill all the little children? Why did you kill the little children? Well, if they grew up and they knew that we had eliminated their parents, they would be enemies of Germany. So we were interested in long-range security. This is called a justification for murdering thousands of little children, young people like those sitting in the audience, too. If they were the age of those in the audience, they didn't kill them right away. They worked them to death. Bundle them up and send them off to a concentration camp, whip them and beat them and starve them, and when they can't work anymore, gas them and burn them and use the ashes for fertilizer in the field and use the fat to make soap. Hooray for them. Cut off the hair, make mattresses. That's what this is about. It's not about paragraph 125. It's about whether you're prepared to stop this kind of inhumane, rotten type of dealing with our disputes in violation of the existing law. The law in the Charter is very clear. They have listed a dozen ways of settling disputes by nonviolent means, or any other means which are nonviolent, to settle whatever your disputes are. And we have a long way to go. All right? Now, where are we going as a result of Kampala? I want to It has been mentioned by Michael Schaaf, Professor Michael Schaaf, that the German government, President of Germany, a few weeks ago, I was lecturing in Berlin on the way to Kampala. They gave me a big iron cross to hang around my neck. When the Germans put a rope around my neck, I'm always afraid they'll pull it up. They put that big cross around my neck. And it was an appreciation, I'm sure, of the work done in Nuremberg. And I was moved by the fact that we had a new German government. I had some hesitation about accepting it, frankly. But I was moved by the fact it was a new government, a new regime, new way of thinking. The Germans had suffered enough. And they had come to the conclusion that war has got to go. And it was a German initiative which put the crime of aggression into the statute when we were at Rome. And it was a German initiative, largely inspired by Judge Cowell, who you'll hear later in the day, that has been fighting to have aggression listed as a punishable crime, not merely as an epithet. I thought it was quite ironic that at that time, with the Germans welcoming Nuremberg and showing their appreciation, the United States representatives were saying, that was then, now is now, forget it. Forget the biggest step forward that we had taken toward a rational world order. And it was painful, and I respect the views of people who have a different perception of how to make a peaceful world, and they should be respected. But what happened to our reputation? The wonderful reputation we had when we came out after World War II. Everybody said you were an American. They came, they embraced you. J'ai fait le débarquement en Normandie. If I told that to a Frenchman, I had landed in Normandy, oh, we gave me a big hug and a kiss. That changed. You're an American? Huh. When are you going to indict the president? I had many such requests. I didn't draw up any indictment. But I got the books, and I wrote an introduction to several of them, in which I said, look, this is my country. Can't we do better? So, where do we go? I think I would like, for the sake of the children, to tell you a little story. Well, let me first tell you my own reaction to Kampala. I was there from the beginning, before the beginning, and I gave him a big pep talk, which is, I don't know what I exactly said. I never have a prepared text, and usually I don't remember what I say because I speak from the heart and it comes out. But I gave him a big talk, and I said, come on, guys, here's your chance. Let's get aggression condemned as a deterrent. I don't think that's going to end all wars. Of course not. There are family wars, but some deterrent effect it may have. And if it has some deterrent effect, that's good enough. That's good enough. And I wrote to Admiral Mike Mullen, who is the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and I'd heard him on television making a speech saying he would rather deter a war than fight one. I said, that's my boy. That's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about deterring a war. And Ambassador Rapp and I, and Sandra, who's here, who does these nice motion pictures, who did this very nice cutout of Whitney supporting it, we went together to West Point. And I said to the soldiers, look, I'm here because I don't like you getting killed. I don't like you coming home maimed. I don't like you going to war at all and killing other people either. And everybody was happy and so on. I said, yes, that's sensible. And I said to Admiral Mullen, look, I'm with you. They say the Pentagon is the cause of the trouble. Take a stand. And he wrote back and he said, your country loves you for your duty to your country. Well, we love you, Benny, we love you, you know. But that's a legal problem. I don't deal with legal problems. So he referred it over to State Department. And so there we are. And the State Department takes a position. Well, we don't want to overburden the prosecutor. It's a wobbly bicycle. You're giving him more cases in aggression. You're overloading the poor prosecutor. I asked the prosecutor, would you feel overloaded with that? He said, no, of course not. And the prosecutor is going to be politically motivated. I said, will you be politically motivated? He said, how can I be politically motivated? I have the law. It says I have to carry it out. I'm sworn to carry it out. I do carry it out. Politics has got nothing to do with that. Who would make such a complaint about politically motivated? Oh, it happened to be the members of the P5, the permanent members of the Security Council, which is the most politically motivated organization that ever existed in human history. And they say, oh, we can't have that. And they come, it has never been defined. Oh, that one killed me. I have written books and articles on the definition of aggression. It was good enough for Justice Jackson. If the crime has not been defined, it's unfair to try a man for it. Every lawyer knows that. And Nuremberg trials were absolutely fair. That was a basic principle. You gave the defendants every possible right. And that may be, it certainly is a principle today, even more so, and perhaps too much so, in the existing courts. But if you tried somebody for action which was not defined as a crime, that would be an illegal trial. Jackson would have been illegal. It was not so. Jackson wouldn't do that, and he didn't. And Nuremberg judgment was affirmed not only by the four powers and their expert legal staffs, and they were there, but also then by the General Assembly of the United Nations, by the International Law Commission, by precedents in Tokyo, by precedents in England, where the judges recently saying that it was clear enough at the time of Nuremberg, and it hasn't become more ambiguous since then, it's defined. But the big argument was, hasn't been defined, hasn't been defined. That sounds like a wonderful argument. If you come to somebody who doesn't know anything, and you say, look, they want to try somebody, but the crime hasn't been defined. You go, oh, you can't try him. You can't try him, hasn't been defined, has to be defined. So I kept hearing that argument, and it was driving me crazy. Because I wrote not only the 2 volumes on it, which specified specifically all the problems, but dozens of articles. And it never happened. It never happened. It wasn't defined. So they finally reached a new definition. The problem is over. I don't like to dwell on old problems. It's finished. It's solved. I like to think positive, okay? The American position, which was supported by other nations, and not just the United States, and I want to repeat that I am a firm American patriot, was not persuasive, to put it politely. The arguments that they brought out against it were not persuasive. And why did they make such foolish arguments from good lawyers? Because they didn't want to say, hey, we'd rather go to war because we could think we can win it. As though you could win a war. You can't win a war. The only winner in war is death. But it would look too stupid to say we're in favor of war. My website has a caption, law, not war. And that sums it up. They don't want to accept it. They're afraid. They're afraid that something will happen. They will lose some of their vital interests or some of the things they're concerned about. And what are people concerned about? It's fear which drives them largely. That their particular religion may be suppressed, that their country will lose its power, that they will lose their oil or their wealth. These are the things which motivate people to go out and send innocent people out to kill other innocent people, as though that would solve anything. And it doesn't. It doesn't solve a damn thing. So, okay. So I'm sitting there in Kampala. I was honored to make an opening speech. They called me on between, give them a little pep talk, Ben, it's sagging. The thing is sagging. It's going downhill. I said, look, talk to them. I said, look, it's not a matter here of just kicking the ball around the court. We got to hit it into the goal box. That's what we're after. We're trying to stop war making, illegal war making. That's what we're trying to do. We're not just arguing, kicking the ball. You kick it here, we kick it there, we kick it here and there for 20 years. That's not the point. We have to stop the killing. It's going on right now. And as we sit here, there are American boys and others as well. I'm not only concerned with the Americans, but for all of them who are being killed right now. For what? You can tell them, oh yeah, humanitarian intervention. The ICC statute deals with that. They say the court has to take everything into consideration, all the circumstances of the crime. It must prove intent, evil intent, and motive as part of the prosecution. Prosecutor is not going to bring a case against someone where we really went in because the people were being murdered by the regime in power, and we stopped it, and then we got out without any particular benefit to ourselves and used the minimum force necessary. We haven't bothered to define humanitarian intervention because we don't want to. We want a free hand. We want a free hand. We'll decide when the time comes. Okay, this is the world you've got. All right, that's enough complaining about the world. What have we really got? I can't end with a negative note. I will end on two things. First, pointing out to you specifically what progress has been made. When I get through with my griping and crying, I still see the big picture. And it's been a long life, and I've been at it more than anybody alive, dead or alive, I think. And the progress has been fantastic, absolutely fantastic. When I began, Harvard Law School did not admit women. Women were not admitted to any reputable law school. The first 7 judges elected to the International Criminal Court were women. Fatou Bensouda sits here, deputy prosecutor, a woman. We had no international criminal courts. There was no such thing as international criminal law. There was no such thing as humanitarian law. I knew René Cassin. He got the Nobel Prize for the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. I knew Raphael Lemkin, who invented the term genocide. Genocide is listed as a crime in the Statute of the International Criminal Court without debate, without discussion. It took the United States 40 years to ratify the Genocide Convention, 40 years. We introduced it. It took us 40 years. None of those things existed. It's a shame we allowed Rwanda to happen in our lifetime, another Holocaust, even more intense than the Nazi Holocaust. It stimulated us to create a court, international criminal, 10,000 rapes first in Yugoslavia. We got to court there, and then we went on with Rwanda. And our poor friend here, Richard Goldstone, had to run to both courts. So we were sitting here, you see the evolution, right here in the first row, of international criminal law. And it's fantastic. It really is fantastic. When I began this, I remember discussing it with some very learned people, and I realized that it was not likely to accomplish anything. The immediate goal was to get an international criminal court. They said it'll never happen. It'll never happen. Nations will not be willing to give up their sovereign right. Well, they were almost right, but not quite. In fact, they were wrong, with difficulties. So let me tell you what drives me. The conclusion of Kampala, with its finally accepting a revised definition of aggression. So instead of being a violation of the Charter, it's a manifest violation of the Charter. All right, we'll buy that, okay? We argued for hundreds of hours whether it should be a flagrant violation of the Charter or a manifest violation of the Charter. I'm sitting over there looking, what difference does it make? It's a violation of the Charter. You're going out killing people. It has to be of concern to the international community as a whole. What are you doing playing games with the lives of people like this? But they said, okay, a manifest violation, that we'll buy. So we now have a consensus definition of aggression. Of course, in that consensus, it says that if the Security Council decides it's not aggression, then it's not aggression. And if they decide that something else is aggression, which isn't listed, so it is aggression. And if somebody does this for noble causes, such as freedom from alien domination or self-determination, that's not aggression. That's a justification. So they have this nice definition, which nations without much imagination even can interpret it to suit their own goals. It's very, very weak foundation, but it's there. The definition of aggression is no longer an excuse why nations shouldn't accept the court. We've buried that, I hope. But now come, the other excuses. It says very clearly, if you don't want to be bound, you're not bound. It says so, several places. Security Council wrote that in all over the place. Security Council can stop it. A nation can decide for itself if it wants to try the people, if they're able and willing to do so. The prosecutor must turn the case over to him. The United States, why they haven't done it, I don't know, could just add one sentence to to the criminal code saying federal courts are authorized to try any of the crimes listed in the statute of the International Criminal Court. The effect of that is the United States has priority jurisdiction on anything in the statute. You can pull the case back at any time they're ready to go to trial. They don't do that. Why? Why? They'd rather have it this way. And other nations can do the same. Why don't they do it? It's a clause they wrote in, giving themselves that complementarity principle. Because they're afraid. They don't know what's going to happen, new system, who's going to come in. They like it the way it is. They're not the ones who are dying. It's somebody from Alabama and from, I don't know where, Oklahoma, somewhere else. So, all in all, I see the positive things. Aggression is still listed as a crime, thanks to the German initiative. And crimes against humanity are punishable. Nobody raised that. Wonderful, wonderful. I kept my fingers crossed. As prosecutors, charge them with aggression. You can't do it if it's not in the statute. You can't. Charge them with crimes against humanity. Charge them with war crimes, which are inevitable in every war. Inevitable. There's no such thing as crimes against a war without crimes against humanity. It is the biggest crime against humanity. Leila, where are you? You're drawing up a convention on crimes against humanity. I can think of nothing more detrimental to the right to life, which is the first right of human rights, as laid down by my friend René Cassin, than sending innocent boys out to war to kill people they don't know and run the risk of being killed themselves. And all of the suffering and pain that goes with it. If you're drawing up a convention on crimes against humanity, somewhere you've got to have a reference to the fact that waging an illegal war, being responsible, I'm not talking about the common soldiers. There was no enlisted men in my dock. They were all generals. The leaders who send people out for that purpose are committing a criminal act, which is punishable, and hopefully that will deter some of them. Now let me tell you a little story. It's primarily for the kids. There is my study at home. I have a glass door, leads a little alcove where I write my books, not for publication, my notebooks. They've been published by publishers, but they were my notebooks. I had all the documents. And as the sign says, here lies Tycho Brahe ad infinitum. And it was put on by my oldest daughter about 30 years ago. Here lies Tycho Brahe ad infinitum. And that explains me. And I'll tell you what that means. I'm sure there's nobody here who knows what that means. Tycho Brahe was a Danish astronomer. And he lived before Columbus. And it was believed at that time that astronomers, like Copernicus and Galileo and others, would be able to understand the meaning of the universe if they could study the stars. They'd see what's happening in the vast firmament. And Tycho, who was a nobleman, persuaded the king to let him build an astronomical observatory in the town of Wen, which is near Elsinore in Denmark. Remember, your hamlet would go down to Elsinore. It's right off the coast of Elsinore. And he built this, he invented the telescopes, and he built an observatory there, and he charted the stars. He made a note every night. He'd go out and make a chart of the stars. Well, he did that for about 20 years. And the old king died, and young prince came on the throne. He said, what's going on over there? We got a budget. What they're spending money for. Send some of his men out, general accounting office equivalent, and said, hey, wake up, Tycho, because, as you know, astronomers, they have to sleep during the day because they work at night. He said, wake up, Tycho. What have you been doing for these 20 years? He said, I have been charting the stars. You've been what? I've been charting the stars. Each one is very precise. I can swear to it myself. I observed it very closely every night, and I moved its movements in relationship to the other stars. He said, well, what do you got to show for it? He said, well, I have 75 volumes of all these charts. What do you hope to achieve by it? Well, if I live long enough, I hope to reach 100. I said, are you mad? What's the use of it? Well, he said, I must admit that I have not yet been able to figure out the meaning of the universe from this. But I believe that someday somebody will. And I will have saved that person 25 years of labor. And the interesting sequel is that when our astronauts landed on the moon, and I gave a symbol of that to Mrs. Cowell, who's an old friend, when they landed on the moon, they had with them the tables of Tycho. Perhaps I've been wasting my life, but someday you may land on the moon too. Thank you very much.
The Jackson Center is a historical and educational facility dedicated to preserving the legacy of this country lawyer who became Solicitor General, Attorney General, a Justice of the Supreme Court, and served as Chief Prosecutor at the Nuremberg trials of Nazi war criminals following World War II. To learn more about this program, Robert Jackson, the Jackson Center, and upcoming events, the Jackson Center is located at 305 East 4th Street, Jamestown, New York, and found on the web at www.roberthjackson.org or contacted by telephoning 716-483-6646.